as a thank you, Ivy. Advocacy planning as an approach of advocacy. We took some time to discuss tactics in advocacy, so that even as we think about how to bring our plans to life, we also have an understanding of the kind of tactics that we can employ to give us the success that we are looking for in terms of advocacy. We also highlighted that we'll be sharing these resources with you for you to read further, and that at the end of these training sessions, we expect to see progress, particularly in the creation of different advocacy resources. So today we will be focusing on how to conduct policy analysis, so I'll just pull up the slide now. I hope the Copper Rose folks will be able to join us shortly. Yesterday, I think we had quite an interactive session, so we'll try and keep it similar. I will not speak as actively. I have a bit of an unusual throat, but what I'll ask us to do is to, where possible, have our videos on so that this can be more engaging. So to start us off, as we've done with other previous the previous module, we will start with just a discussion on definitions, and I'll invite all of us to share our thinking. How would you define a policy analysis? How would you define a policy analysis? In your own words, according to your own understanding. There's no right or wrong answer. It's so that we can find each other and see where we all are. Welcome back to the Copper Rose folks. Welcome to Jerry. So let's take a moment so that we are all kind of in the room to share our thoughts. What do you think a policy analysis is? You can go on Google if you want, take a minute or so. We can write in the chat. You can also unmute your mics and share, or lift up your hand, and I'll call on you to share your thoughts. So what is a policy analysis from your understanding? I'm inviting you all, Alice, Jacqueline, Mercy, Asha. So we had Jerry, we have Emmanuel as well. So what are your thoughts on what a policy analysis is?
Good morning, Imurai.
Good morning, Alice. Please go ahead.
Okay. Policy analysis can be identifying, or it's a process of which you're going to identify some of the policies that will help you to change or to address the problem that you have.
Okay, great. So it's identifying the problems around the policy area you're looking at. You've spoken about also looking at the changes that will need to take place. Thank you for that, Alice. Anyone else who wants to share their thoughts on what they think a policy analysis is? In your own words.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Morning, Jerry.
So from what my friend there said, I think it's a process, of course, but also it starts with evaluating and assessing, first of all, the proposed and the existing policies. We have to understand the objectives, maybe the impact, effectiveness, and we have to do this in the context of achieving the desired outcomes.
I could swear you got the slide deck yesterday. So Yeah, the words that you've mentioned, we will touch on them. We'll look at effectiveness, we'll look at words like evaluating policies. Generally, because we are looking at analysis. You know, that should tell you a lot about what we will be doing. So it includes a lot of what you have shared. I'll invite one more person to share their thoughts. Jacqueline, Mercy, Asha, Emmanuel, would you like to give it a go? What would you say policy analysis is? Yes, please go ahead, Emmanuel.
Okay, so just to add on what my other two colleagues have mentioned, I think policy analysis can also be perceived to be an evaluation of the needs that a particular community or society needs against, would say, the policies that are there. So you evaluate the needs that they have. This can be a problem. And then you also evaluate the policy that is needed in order to remedy or to work around that situation. On top of that, it also deals with the formulation of the policies. So policy analysis can also be perceived to be a process in which a policy is formulated, adopted, or implemented, putting into mind the needs that a particular space has. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Emmanuel, for that. I also see Mercy has written policy analysis is identifying maybe policies that speak towards gaps and problems that need problem solving. So all of these are ways of defining policy analysis, and they are very accurate, very accurate. Let me just highlight a few things. So one of the things mentioned was community needs, and looking at the needs of the community and comparing those with the policies that are in existence and identifying gaps or areas that can be strengthened to better respond to community needs. And the reason for policy analysis is, you know, for advocacy purposes. So to inform changes in policy. So before you speak to a policymaker, before you conduct a campaign to engage your community on an issue, it's important that you understand the policy. You understand the policy gaps. You understand the people affected by the policies in question. And you understand and analyze what alternatives, policy alternatives, can help address the issues. Welcome, Arnold. Please do remember to mute unless you are sharing or responding to one of the questions we'll have. So we will just jump into, I took a few statements from the broader definitions provided in the guideline document on how to conduct a policy analysis. And I thought these two statements captured the essence of what a policy analysis could be referred to. So here it talks about the examination and evaluation, that word is back, of available options to address economic, social, and public issues before they are presented to policymakers for consideration. So it's important to refer to the audience. The audience of a policy analysis is a policymaker. The purpose of a policy analysis is for policymakers to consider in their policy making. So you look at available options. What options? Policy options. And you look at a range of issues. So policies address different things of public interest. It could be economic issues, social issues. They could look at issues of health, even politically, issues of civic engagement, civil rights. whatever is of public interest. If the existing policies are not addressing those issues, then you conduct an analysis to provide evidence to that fact, and you can use that analysis as you start to discuss with policymakers. We will, in the coming days, also look at how to create a policy brief, which is a more succinct and more compact output of policy analysis. But today we will look at the in-depth analysis of policy. The second point is policy analysis focuses on the variables. So the different factors that can change that are likely to influence a given policy and affect its outcomes. The goal of policy analysis is to solve concrete policy problems. So there are problems that are not policy problems, and there are problems that are policy problems. You might talk about young people not accessing enough sexual and reproductive health and rights information, but your country might already have a policy that says every school must provide comprehensive sexuality education, that says that health centers should provide information to young people, and so forth. Sometimes the policies are already there, and so you don't need a new policy. You don't need to change the existing policy. Sometimes it's a challenge of implementation, which becomes an accountability issue. So one of the steps that you take, which we'll share in this slide deck, is you have to understand the problem and be able to identify what the actual policy problem is. If the issue or problem you are addressing does not have, cannot be solved through a policy change or introduction of a new policy or removal of a restrictive policy, then it's not a policy issue. You disqualify it. You don't have to worry about it. So it's important to keep that in mind. Not every problem is a policy problem. Not every problem requires advocacy as the solution. Sometimes you need social mobilization, social and behavior change communication. So the better you understand what the actual problem is, the easier it will be for you to identify what's actually policy related and what isn't. So generally, there are 5 types of policy analysis. We will focus on one of them, which is in the next slide. Normally, policy analysis focuses on cost effectiveness. And a lot of people who study public policy, a lot of the study is also quantitative, for you to be able to calculate which policy has the greatest cost to benefit ratio. So one of them is a formal cost benefit analysis, where you just look at the monetary costs of the impacts of a proposed policy alternative, and you compare. You can also conduct what's called a qualitative cost benefit analysis, where you give values to different factors such as ethics and political acceptability. So you can say this policy option is better because it ranks higher in political acceptability. And this is the value of political acceptability. Maybe the ethics of the policy proposed are in line with social norms. So there's a higher value that you give to that policy. You also have what is called a modified cost-benefit analysis. Here you score the financial or monetary goals and the qualitative goals separately, and then you compare. And then you also have generally a cost-effectiveness analysis, where you look at the policy alternative that achieves the level of benefit at the lowest cost. So the cheapest option to achieve the benefits you intend to society. So let's say you want to increase the rate of voluntary HIV testing and counseling, and you want to increase uptake to maybe 60% of adolescents, are aware of their HIV status, and you look at the policy that is likely to achieve that goal at the lowest cost. So you can, remove user fees. You can ensure it's mandatory for self-test kits to be made available. You can ensure that all health facilities provide these services on a voluntary basis. There are different things that you can do, but your main tool for analysis is the cost effectiveness. And then we have what is called multi-goal policy analysis, which is the one that we will spend time on today. So this one is used when there are multiple possible policy goals, and one or more of these goals cannot be quantified. So as organizations, we may not have the capacity at present to analyze complex data in terms of financial data. We may not have the expertise in our staff. We may not be able to afford to hire that expertise from consultants and the like. So whenever you are unable to effectively quantify multiple or some policy goals but you want to compare these policy alternatives, you then conduct what's called a multi-goal policy analysis, which is a lot more qualitative than quantitative. So that's what we'll try and explore today. So quite quickly, these are some of the steps that you can follow in conducting a multi-goal policy analysis. One of those that I mentioned is defining the problem. Also, you have to establish what your criteria for evaluation will be. You have to start to generate alternative policy solutions. You project the outcomes, and one person mentioned this in this conversation today. You evaluate the alternatives, and then you make a decision. So I'll just walk us through briefly each of these steps before sharing with you, like, if you are going to write a policy analysis document, what are the guidelines on how you can practically write a policy analysis document. So we'll first go through these steps, and then we'll look at how to put a policy analysis document together. So in terms of defining the problem, the first thing to consider is, what are the hurdles or barriers or constraints that are preventing the achievement of the policy goals? So a policy goal can be to, as I mentioned, to achieve 60% coverage of HIV, voluntary HIV testing and counseling amongst adolescents in a particular population. So once you've identified what you want to achieve as a policy goal, you have to define the problems, the policy problems. What is standing in the way of the achievement of that goal? You have to look at the magnitude and extent of the problem. Some of the questions you can ask yourself are, is this problem important? Who is it important to? Why is it important? Is it unusual? So is it a unique issue, or it's common in other areas? Can it be solved? Can it be easily solved? Or it will require quite a lot of resources and quite a lot of time? Who is involved? So who is affected by the issue and who can affect the issue? Why are they involved? What power do they have over the problem? So if you want to understand these and respond to some of these questions, it really helps if you consult within the communities and stakeholders that are affected by the problem, and to ask them what their perception of the problem is. So one person mentioned that policy analysis is finding out what, or understanding community needs and comparing those community needs with the available policies, and to determine if the policies are adequate enough to address the community needs. And if they are not, you start to identify alternatives or policy alternatives that can help address the gaps in community needs. So it's essential to consult widely with communities. Lastly, use relevant sources of data and make use of information from similar policy analysis. So you can do your own primary data collection, but you can also do and use secondary data and to analyze that data as well. So others may have already assessed or analyzed issues related to what you are trying to address. Others might have done an analysis on youth-friendly health service provision. Some might have done an analysis on policies that support a health-seeking behavior in adolescents. So find connections with different analysis, similar policy analysis, and collect that data and make use of it as well in helping you define the problem. Then your second step, you establish an evaluating criteria. When we say evaluating criteria, we are saying you have to decide how you are going to compare the policy alternatives. Let's remember, there are many or different types of policies that can solve the same issue. These are what we call policy alternatives. And in this process, you will have to generate different types of policies, possible policies, so that when you then talk to your policymakers, you can tell them, we looked at that policy alternative, that policy alternative, that policy alternative. This is the one that we think is the most efficient. So you go out there with solutions already, and then you assess those solutions, and then you present the alternative that you prefer. So your evaluation criteria should help you to determine if there'll be a ranking of importance among the criteria and to determine the rules that will be used to compare policy alternatives. In terms of ranking of criteria, let's say you include norms, social norms, alignment to existing social norms. And then you include alignment to international standards. And then you say health benefit to adolescents. That's another criteria. You might not want to rank all of them with the same level of importance. Maybe the most important criteria will be the direct health benefit to adolescents. And so you might give that one a higher percentage. Let's say you're scoring each policy alternative out of 100. So what you might do is say, okay, for direct health benefit to adolescents, I'll give that 50 out of 100. For the international standards, I'll give that 30. For the social norms, I'll give that 20. So when I'm scoring the policy, I assess out of 50 how effective criteria you can include maybe costs, benefits, effectiveness, equity, legality, administrative ease, that's a typo, and political acceptability. So I just want to check quickly because I just got a notification that my network was a bit unstable. Just let me know, can you hear me clearly? Can you see the screen? Is everything okay?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see the screen.
Okay, great. Thanks. Right, so the third step, some of which I've spoken to already, is now you start to generate alternative solutions. So think about policy solutions that can potentially solve the problem. Sometimes you may not know enough about policymaking to actually come up with what are called policy alternatives. So what you can do is to do research. Look at the issue that you are addressing. Go on Google or Google Scholar or another search platform. Look for policies that have been created around that issue in other countries. Also look for policy analyses that have been done on the same issue. And then pick out ideas from, it could be countries, contexts, communities similar to yours that you think have solutions that you can also consider. And that can help you to generate solutions. You can also bring together students or graduates in public policy. You can speak to or consult current or previous policymakers and ask them to share insights on how they would create policies for the issues at hand. You can even bring in, it could be constitutional lawyers, lawyers with a focus on public health, civil rights, and so forth. You can bring in an audience that understands and has the ability to generate policy alternatives. The goal is to generate as many alternatives as possible. So this is a very important point. There needs to be a strong and realistic connection between the proposed alternatives and the problem on hand. So whatever policies are there, the alternatives you've created, they must clearly link and be able to resolve the problem that you've identified. Don't just brainstorm for brainstorming's sake and come up with 200 policies. Maybe only 20 of those, directly addressing the policy or the problem on hand. Be specific, be realistic, and connect directly with the problem that you're trying to solve. So another way of getting information on policy alternatives, talk to the stakeholders and communities that are affected by the problem. They might not be able to speak to you in terms of policy, but they can give you ideas and recommendations that you can start to process and say, okay, they said we need to make sure services are free. So let's figure out a policy alternative that includes provision of free services. So there are different ways to generate those alternatives. The fourth step, project the outcomes. Now, this requires quite a bit of work. For each of the alternatives that you identify, you need to predict what the result of implementing that policy will be, both the negative results and positive results. So you need to conduct a comprehensive and deeper analysis of the proposed alternatives and the outcome that you want to achieve. When you start to explore the outcomes, it will paint a picture to you that helps you see, so which policy is projected to give outcomes that are closest to the goal that we're trying to achieve. Remember, ensure a strong and realistic connection between the proposed alternative and the expected outcome. That's what you're looking for. You have a goal that you want to achieve. So you want to see which alternatives are likely to get you to the expected outcome sooner, and which ones are expected to create those expected outcomes in greater volume than others. So ask yourself, is it the outcome that you are looking for? Who benefits from this outcome? What other outcomes could there be? Are these good or bad outcomes? And I mentioned, are there any unintended outcomes? And are these good or bad? So take as much time as you can. This now is a bit more of a technical job that you need to do as a team in-house to start to answer these questions for each policy alternative. Once you have done that projection, now you bring that criteria that you identified in step 2, and you use it to evaluate the alternatives. What you're looking for is, are these policies feasible? So is it implementable? Is it cost effective? Does it achieve the goals? You also want to know, are the alternatives acceptable? Acceptable to the community that you are trying to reach, acceptable to policymakers for them to even want to take on, acceptable to society in general, because laws and policies are made in the public interest. And even though certain laws and policies might benefit the community you are representing, if they don't have the support of the public, it can be difficult to make them sail through. Sometimes in your advocacy, you can even look to address the acceptability of the policy alternative you want to present before you present it, so that you change the public's perception on the issue and the public's perception on the alternative before you present it. So there are ways also to address that. But during the analysis, you just want to understand, is this feasible? Is this acceptable? Some policy alternatives can be very feasible, effective, but may not be very acceptable. And it's up to you now to decide what tactics you can use in that respect. So during this step, you need to narrow down. So if there are any alternatives that you've identified that don't really fit, are not very feasible, not very acceptable, you can eliminate them at this stage before you then do an in-depth analysis of the alternatives that make the first cut. You can, if you have 20, maybe you've selected, you might end up with 5 that score really highly when you evaluate them. And those 5 are the ones you can now do a deep dive in to save time, so that you can focus on the alternatives that are most likely to be the ones that you will consider at the end. So you can display and distinguish by showing strengths and weaknesses, and using scenario mapping, where you describe the best and the worst case scenarios. So you can even visualize this. You can use graphics to show, so it's easier for you to pick out which ones are stronger or not. Some of the tools you can use: matrices, reports, lists, charts, and as I mentioned, you can use scenario mapping for this step. Finally, you have to make a decision, and you have to choose one, the best option or the best policy alternative based on the insights that you have generated in the previous steps. And you explain your reasons for reaching the decision, and you share, and contrast the decision you've made compared to other alternatives. There's more detail that's provided in the guideline document that can help you with some of this. There are also resources that we will share with you in a Google Drive folder if you want to dig deeper in methods to conduct some of these assessments. So there are 2 things that I'm just going to quickly share before we have time for questions and your feedback. Today's session is a bit technical, so it's more helpful if I try and explain as much as possible, and you take note of all the questions you have, so I can provide clarity where needed. We are likely to finish the session a bit earlier because it's not as heavy as some of the other sessions that we have planned. So one of the tools that you can use, remember your step 1, where you want to understand the policy problem that you are trying to address and determine the goals, the policy goals that you want to then achieve. Some of the questions that you can ask are, what are the aspects of the problem that you want to tackle? What are the aspects of the problem you want to tackle? Problems are complex. Yesterday, we discussed looking at the root causes of a problem. And that a lot of us are so quick to just accept that this is the problem, and then we run and try and find solutions. But some problems are too big to solve in their entirety. It is wiser and more resource conscious for you to pick out which aspects of the problem you want to tackle. So you have to give thought to which aspects of the problem are best solved through a policy and which aspects are not. So policies deal with issues of criminalization, deal with issues of freedom of access, deal with issues of rights, access, and as I mentioned, they not necessarily acceptability, but they deal with affordability. There are different aspects of one problem. And there are different tools you can use to address different aspects of a problem. So when you've identified the problem and the root causes, you need to identify which aspects of this problem do I want to tackle, and can this be tackled through policy? One of the questions we have to keep asking ourselves is, so what? Why should I bother? Why should we even take action on this? Why does it matter? Who does it matter to? Yes, I've identified the problem, but is this of public interest? Will this help people in any way or in a significant way? Or maybe there are other issues that are more pertinent, more urgent, and more critical to address. It's important, and I mentioned this yesterday, in terms of advocacy. You need to identify which stage of the policy cycle your issue is at. And we can spend some time also discussing, different components of a policy cycle. But I can share with you, for example, yesterday I said, if you want to change a law, you might find that, countries differ, constitutions differ, parliaments differ. You might find that it takes 12 to 18 months for a bill to be proposed. It starts maybe as a motion in parliament, and then it's debated as a motion, and then it is proposed as a bill. And then a parliamentary committee starts to discuss the details of that bill. And then after they've discussed the details of the bill, they bring that bill back to Parliament. And Parliament now discusses the bill and looks at ways to change it and so forth before it comes to a vote. Sometimes the vote will lead to an impasse where there's nothing passed, no one agrees. And so now you need someone else, maybe the head of state, to take a definitive decision and so forth. I remember colleagues from CDF, they had explained that, and someone has their mic on, please do remember to unmute, to mute yourself, sorry, unless you have something to share. I remember colleagues from CDF in Tanzania, you mentioned that you want to do work on ending child marriage. And in your work plan, you spoke about the fact that there's an ongoing debate on the Marriage Act, and there's been court cases and so forth. But now the decision that has been made is to go and consult communities before bringing the issue back. So you need that information so that you can figure out and understand, when I do my advocacy, what am I focusing on? How do I support this phase of the policy cycle until it gets to the end and this is approved as a policy? You need that information, and you can include that information in your problem and stakeholder analysis. I've spoken already about the policy problem and its context, but you also need to think about blind spots. So what is it that we don't know? I know it's a hard thing to process, but I don't think we ask ourselves that question that much. So what do you know that you don't know? What do you know that you don't know? So maybe you don't know which policymaker is an ally or likely to support this issue, and so forth. You need to find out which areas need further research. Maybe you don't have data on certain things. So figure out the gaps. What is it about the problem that you don't know yet, or you don't know enough of, that you need to seek out more information on? Also, what aspects of the problem might be overlooked so far? We are in the health space generally, but then there are other issues beyond health. And I tell you, a human being has got so many facets beyond health. You've got the economic side, the social side, you've got your psychological side, emotionally, and so forth. You've got so many areas that make a person whole. So what more a community? So when you think about even the impacts of an issue, look beyond your area of focus. The fact that you don't know enough about an area doesn't mean you shouldn't seek further information on it. Look for that information. Policymakers act in the public interest. The more information you have about the issue and its relevance to, public health, public safety, civil rights, and so forth, the more compelling your case will be. Don't look at things from one angle. A policy analysis has to be as 360-degree as possible. Look everywhere and bring that information in. Sometimes you can look at, they are what are called continuums. They are youth development, for example, has different facets, different elements. You can look at even theories of change. Study the conceptual frameworks, the theoretical frameworks, the framing of how, issues related to what you're looking at. If it's an education issue, you need to be reading theories of change on education, because they can help you pick out what aspects of the problem have not been analyzed and need to be looked at in terms of research. Those are what are referred to as your blind spots. Right. This is the last slide in terms of the information. So this is, I remember as I was finalizing this, the quick details on this, there's a full breakdown of each of these in the guideline document. So you can dig deeper and read further in terms of, okay, executive summary is 2 to 3 pages. What does an executive summary entail? The information is there. If you're writing a policy analysis paper, and as you can see, it's quite lengthy. It's 20 to 25 pages. This is in terms of the actual content and not like the glossary, table of contents, and what. This is the gist of it. So if you are thinking of writing a policy analysis paper, these are the guidelines that you can follow in terms of the length of each section. Of course, as you will know, executive summaries are normally very brief, but they give a concise account of the entire narrative. They provide all the essential information in a nutshell, in case an individual does not have time to read the whole thing. Then your introduction and problem statement, normally this is an appetizer, is to ensure that the individual, the audience, are interested in reading the rest of the document. And of course, in that, you also share the problem statement. So your analysis of the problem from a 360-degree perspective, as I mentioned. And then you summarize the evidence. So what have you found so far with regards to this issue? And then you start to share the alternative policy responses. This is the how, the what, so the practicalities. What does this policy entail? What are its weaknesses? What are its strengths? Then you speak about your evaluation criteria, how you are weighting each of the criteria and why you've selected that criteria to begin with. And then you apply the criteria. So this is your analysis now to say, okay, this is these are the alternative policy options we have. This is the criteria we have. This is how we've scored each of these policies in line with that. This is the narrative of our analysis, and then you make your recommendation. So you disqualify some options, you qualify some options, and then you decide on your final option. So that's an example of how to write a policy analysis paper. As I said, most of what I've described in terms of the detail of each of these sections is provided in the guideline document. So I will pause here and invite any questions, any comments you may have on how to conduct a policy analysis. Let's talk. I see we still have Alice, we have Arnold, Emmanuel, Jacqueline, Jerry, Joven, Mercy. It's good to have you all on the call. So this is a good point to ask questions for further, advice, or if you have comments or experiences you want to share. This is a good point. So I'm really keen to get your feedback on the information that's been shared so far. Any comments, any questions we may have? Or did you understand everything? So if I were to ask Asha, okay, tell me, how do you conduct a policy analysis now? Asha will quickly explain. Do let me know, because this, the purpose of the session is to clarify any areas where there's that are not clear. What I want to know is, based on this information, would you feel confident enough to conduct a policy analysis? I think that's the question I'll pose to you. Mercy says, from my side, the session was very informative. Okay. Jerry said this might be a bit technical. It's still marinating. Hey, yeah, it is technical. But we are, getting equipped so that we can be able to handle the technical information. I will admit, policy analysis is normally done by policy analysts who are, trained to do this. But as I mentioned, sometimes we may not have the resources in terms of human capital or the finances to bring in some of that expertise. So this multi-goal policy analysis is just it's like a lower cost way of carrying out this policy analysis. You do need to give it some thought. Of course, these slide decks will be shared with you and the guideline document as well. And there are resources that we've put in different folders that can help you dig deeper. Any questions or any more comments? Right, Ivy, do you have any final thoughts, comments? Let's see.
I were anything from my end, but I see there's a question from Arnold in the chat.
Let's see. How can we read a paper and determine this is linked? Okay, I think okay, I hope I understood the question properly. So I believe you are asking about if you are trying to link, first of all, different types of analysis that are similar. So one of the examples I gave was in the country, in your country, in your community, your location. First of all, look at the demographic. So, which is the age range and the characteristics of the community that is affected by the policy in question. let's say we're talking about adolescent girls and young women aged 15 to 19 in Kakamega, yeah, and or or maybe for the CDF's sake, let's say maybe it's a small location like Mbezi, yeah, and now we are saying we want to conduct a policy analysis of the or we're looking at access to health services for this age group. So what we need to do is to look for policy analysis papers that have been written about adolescent girls and young women across a range of issues. You can look at development, you can look at health as a whole, you can even look at education. Sometimes there are linkages to health. So look at different angles of development. And you get that information and you pick out analysis that is related to your issue. So as I mentioned, I don't know how I can explain this. I wish I had some of the theories of change I've worked on nearby. But you have, let's say you have Twaweza in Tanzania. And they are already a research group. They do some research around education or rights. So you can also identify research institutions, policy think tanks, or when I say policy think tanks, there are people like who do strategic litigation, who are constantly writing. You can look even for their material in newspapers, in magazines. You go to their websites and you check for the publications they've made. Look for organizations that are taking the lead in conducting research on the area that you're interested in. So if you're looking at child marriage, maybe you're also, talking to Msishana. I know that they might not do a lot of research, but they've done quite a bit of work there. So you also ask them, what research do you have? What analysis have you done? It's about partnership and networking. So it's easier when you identify organizations first that are working on the issue, that have the technical know-how, and then you ask them now for the documentation that they have conducted, the research they've conducted, the analysis they've done, and on the issue that you're interested in. So that's how you can connect. So I don't know, Arnold, if that answers your question. Arnold, does that answer your question? I see we've been joined by Cyprian as well. Welcome. Colleagues at CDF. Okay. All right. Do we have any other? Okay, right. Thanks. All right. So I know this may take time. Going back to Jerry's point about this being technical. What I would advise for the organizations that have written that they wanted to conduct a policy analysis, start to write the analysis using the templates that have been provided and the guidelines that have been given, and share what you've been working on with me, with the Y+ team, and we'll give you support to help you to conduct that analysis in a more effective way. We have between now and the end of May. The sooner we start, the better. Yeah, so I'll just hand over to Ivy for any final thoughts. But just as a reminder, we have a session in about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, on how to write a policy brief. So a policy brief is, as you can imagine, shorter than a policy analysis write-up, but has similar themes. And we'll walk through that and also share templates you can use for that purpose. Maybe it will be easier, for you to conduct a policy brief than to conduct a policy analysis because of the time and other technical needs. And it might be a better tool for your advocacy. So that will be in about just under 2 hours this time. So I hand back over to Ivy if we don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Yamurai, and thank you everyone for joining. I think we have any other comments from the end, but just to mention how important these sessions are for all of us. So if you can't join any of the sessions, please just have someone from the team joining so that once we start working on the resources, we have as many of us with the knowledge, and then it's easier because, as Yamurai has mentioned, we are with him till end of May. And it will be beneficial for us if we can really make use of this time we have together. Again, we have budget to support you in conducting dialogues with policymakers. So sitting in these sessions, I see how important they are before we finally have the conversations with policymakers. So just ensure that you gather as much information as possible, even for resources that will not be developing directly. The knowledge is important. Again, as Yamurai has mentioned, the next session is just in under 2 hours, so let's prepare for that. Yeah, other than that, bye. See you in the next session.
Well, thank you, Irene. Thank you, everyone. Let's connect in just under 2 hours. Thank you for joining in. I hope this has been helpful. Bye-bye.